All right, so now that we've practiced graphing linear lines and linear lines with restrictions, now we're going to do our piecewise functions. So remember, the piecewise function is just when we have two or more expressions together, both with restrictions. So we're going to do the exact same thing that we were doing for those last few problems on this page, except we're now going to put these on the same graph. So we're going to have kind of two lines with restrictions on our same graph. But the process that we just did is going to be exactly the same. So we're going to start by doing a t-chart with our endpoint. And we just pick whichever one we want to start with. So usually if we just start with the top one, we're going to pick -1 for our x value. And then because it's a less than, we have to pick a number smaller than -1. So I'm going to choose -2 for my second point. And then now we just go through and find y. So we're substituting -1 in for this x. So -1 minus 2 is -3. And then we do the same thing with the second one. So -2 minus 2 is -4. And then we can start graphing. So again, our endpoint has to be an open circle because there's not a line underneath. So 1, 1, 2, 3, open circle. And then 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, closed circle. And then we connect that into a straight line. And then now we're going to do that exact same process with that second equation. So I'm going to use a different color. Okay, so x, y, again we start with whatever endpoint they give us, so -1. And then this time we need to choose x's that are bigger than -1. So 0. And now we just find our y values. So -1 plus 3 is 2. 0 plus 3 is 3. And we want our endpoint to be a closed circle. So -1, 1, 2, closed circle. And then 0, 1, 2, 3. Line connecting that. Now again, for practice, if we figure out the domain and range, if we start with the domain, so we have to remember that domain represents the x values. So as we're kind of tracing along our graph, we're coming up from the negatives on the x side. So coming along, and then it's going to jump up to this graph. But because it's a closed circle directly on top of an open circle, this x value still counts. So it's still part of our domain. So since it's still part, we're now on this line, and this is going to continue forever to the right. So the domain for this piecewise function is going to be all real numbers. And then our range is our y values. So as we're looking at this, it's going up and down forever, but it's missing this huge chunk in the middle. So that means that we're going to have two parts to the range. So we need everything below this y value and everything above the other y value. And I'm going to start in interval notation this time. So when we're looking at this, where our y values are coming from -infinity all the way up to -1, 2, 3. And it's an open circle, so we want a parenthesis. And then we use that u for the or statement. And then our y values start again at +2, and it's a closed circle, so we're going to use a bracket. And then it's going all the way up to +infinity. So that would be the range for that problem. All right, if we look at our next one, so we're going to do the same process. So again, I'm going to make my t-chart to start with. We're picking our x value based off the one that they give us from the restriction, so 0. And then our second x value we pick so that it has to be less than 0. So I'm going to choose -1. And then now we're just substituting in. So 0 plus 2 is 2. -1 plus 2 is 1. And then because there's not a bar, our first point, so our end point, has to be an open circle. So 0, up 2, open circle. And then left 1, up 1, closed circle. And then again, we're just going to connect those together. Then we're going to do the second piece. So again, we're just going to make a t-chart. So x, y. So again, we're going to pick 0 for our first one. And then this time we need bigger than 0, so I'm going to choose 1. And now we're just substituting in. So 2 times 0 is 0. and then 2 times 1 is 2. And this time our endpoint is going to be a closed circle. Okay, so closed circle on 0, 0, and then right 1, up 2. And then we just connect them into that straight line. So now if we do domain and range, so domain, so again, as I'm looking, we're looking left and right. So this is coming from negative infinity on this line. And then we get to this open circle, but we have a closed circle directly below it, so this x value still counts. And then we're following along our line to the right, so it's going to positive infinity. So this is all real numbers for this one. The range, so again, this is vertical. So as we're looking at this, this is going up forever, down forever. So we need to see if there's a break in our graph. So as we're looking, we do have it broken in between here, but if we kind of search to the sides, we still have graph in that space. So because there's not an actual vertical break in the graph, that means that our range is also going to be all reals for this one. All right, last piecewise function that we're going to graph. So this time we have 3 pieces that we have to worry about. So again, just like before, we're going to start with our first piece. We're going to do our t-chart. So we're picking -4 to start with, and then we need a number less than that, so we can choose -5. And then we're going to substitute to find the y values. So -4 plus 3 is -1. -5 plus 3 is -2. And then for our endpoint, we need an open circle. So left 4, down 1, open circle. And then we're going left 5, down 2, closed circle, connecting them together. All right, so our next piece, so we have 2 endpoints, so that means that we're going to pick -4 and 1 to represent those endpoints. And then as I'm looking, since this is just a number, that means our y value absolutely has to be 5 no matter what. So we are going left 4, and these are both going to be closed circles for the endpoints. 1, 2, 3, 4, up 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, closed circle. And then we're going right 1, up 5 with a closed circle, and connecting them together. And then this time we have that third piece that we need to graph. So I'm going to make a third t-chart for this one. So we're picking 1 to start with as our endpoint. And then we need numbers bigger than 1, so I'm going to choose 2. And now we're just substituting in. So if we substitute 1 in for x, this becomes a -1 because of that negative in front. So we're doing -1 minus 1, so that's -2. And we do the same thing for the next one. So we're going to substitute in a +2, but it becomes negative after our substitution step. So -2 minus 1 is -3. And then we're going to write our graph. So we need an open circle for that endpoint. So we're going right 1, down 2, open circle. Right 2, down 3, closed circle. And then connecting them together. So last thing that we are going to do is our domain and range. So again, domain is going to be our left to right. So as it's on this side, we're coming from -infinity according to our arrow. We're going up. If we go straight up, it's going to jump to this one, so our x value still counts. Going over, jumps back down, and because this is a closed circle over an open circle, that x value still counts. And then we're going to the right. So again, our domain has to be all reals for this one. So now our range, if we're looking, according to both of these arrows, it's all the way down at -infinity. So in this one, it's coming up to -2. But if I go over here, -2 is covered, so that x value, or that y value still counts. And then this one goes up to -1. And then here we have this big break in the graph. So for this first part, again, we have everything from -infinity up to -1 from this graph, and we're going to put a parenthesis because it's an open circle. Or our y value up here on this line, which is at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's our other y value. So that has to go in the curly brackets. So that would be our range for that one.